14, eh? Okay. So I should take about 3 minutes on each one then, right? I'm kidding you, of course. That might be this.
Well, Steve Murphy, thanks so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
All right, Jack. I'm just squaring up the shot here. We got to get the TV part of this right. Okay.
All right. Hear me?
Got you loud and clear.
Awesome. So, first, Steve Murphy, thanks so much for being me today. It's a pleasure.
Hey, I'm happy to do it, Jack. Thanks. Thanks for the invite.
Here's your first question. What inspired you to pursue a career in broadcasting?
Well, I was a kid of 13 years old when the whole Watergate scandal broke in the United States. And I got really interested in the news business, watching and reading the work of Woodward and Bernstein. I didn't become an investigative journalist for sure, and not in the way that they were and are. But it did pique my curiosity about the media. And I was always interested as a kid in radio, and that's where I started out in a radio newsroom. So I think it was the confluence of those two things, being very aware of the role of news people, journalists, and also being very curious and anxious to try my hand at radio, which I was fortunate to do as a 16-year-old kid.
16. Oh, man. Man, I was a little bit older when I started in the broadcasting internet business. So you're a little bit earlier than I was.
Yeah, I was probably too young, if you want to know the truth. I have no regrets about it because it allowed me to have a quite a long career and to stop doing the daily work at a reasonably young age. A few years on you, Jack, but my whole point is that starting young has its advantages and its disadvantages. I had a lot to learn, and I was very fortunate to run into people who were willing to teach me.
Wow. Wow. Can you share a memorable moment from your early days at CFBC Radio?
Well, I have a very vivid memory of one of the earliest stories I covered, and sadly, it's not a happy story. There was a fire in the jail, the city lockup in St. John in June of 1977. I had just turned 17 years of age, and 21 men died in a fire that was later found by the courts to have been deliberately set by an inmate who wanted detention or was trying to get out. And I happened to be either the first or one of the very first people on the scene because the lockup was in the City Hall building in St. John, which was literally down the street and around the corner from CFBC, which was in an old Victorian home on Carlton Street. So I was among the first people on the scene there and got to witness things that no journalist, but certainly no 17-year-old really should have witnessed, namely the bodies and the body bags being removed from the jail in my hometown. So it's not a happy memory, Jack, but it's a very, very vivid memory. And it was also the news story that I used to measure every other news story I covered in a sense, because it was so tragic. There was so much loss of life, and it happened in the place where I was born and raised.
How did hosting the hotline on CJCH Radio shape your career, Steve?
Well, that's a very good question. I was pretty young when I started doing talk radio back in 1982. And I'll be honest with you, when I look back on it now, I listened to some of the tapes of things I said and I realized that I didn't really, didn't really know what I was talking about. So I guess it did a couple of things though, Jack. It made me, first of all, think on my feet because when you're doing open line radio, you don't have a lot of time I mean, you have time to prepare, but you don't have time to think about all your answers. They're not all written down. Your comments tend to come right off the top of your head. So I think it probably made me into a pretty good ad lib, although I'm not sure that everything I said then I would want to repeat now. In fact, I'm sure I wouldn't. But it did teach me in a very practical way to speak on my feet and to think on my feet. And as I say, one of the lessons learned from that time, with the benefit of hindsight, is how ill prepared I really was to do the job. I did the best that I could, and I hope I got better as I went on to do it. But it was a good proving ground, if you will, for the ability to ad lib and think and speak on your feet.
Wow, interesting. What was the transition like from radio to television for you?
Well, it was a lot of fun. The first job I did on TV was when Live at Five started, and they asked me if I would do editorial commentaries. alternating days with a Toronto broadcaster named Dick Smythe, who is a Canadian legend, the late great Dick Smythe. And it was an interesting transition because I was doing opinions on the radio in the morning, and then I'd go over to the television station and do opinions in the afternoon. As you can probably tell, it made for a very long day because my radio work started at about 6 o'clock in the morning, and the television work often didn't finish until supper hour or just before. So it was quite a transition. It was a great way to learn some TV though, and I got to learn from really well-trained camera people who taught me, how to use my body, how to use my voice, where to stand, to be aware of lighting, little things like you and I were doing before we started this broadcast, squaring up or framing up the shot and things of that sort. So it was a good transition. And it was a nicely measured transition in the sense that I wasn't doing TV all day. I was sort of sticking my finger in the water 2 or 3 days of work, 2 or 3 days a week and learning it that way.
What was your favorite part about anchoring Live at 5?
Well, I would have to say it was the interviews I got to do. I was privileged to speak with people from all walks of life. We had prime ministers come through the studio, and we had movie stars, we had singers, we had authors, we had other broadcasters, and I would say that was my favorite part of Live at Five. And in fact, that also was my favorite part of the job I did for almost 30 years on the evening news. One other thing I got to do though on the Live at Five program was a series called Celebrate the Maritimes, where we took basically a mobile television station and we drove all around the Maritimes from Cape North all the way up to northern New Brunswick, out to western New Brunswick, southwest Nova Scotia, all across Prince Edward Island. And we did live shows from a total of about 68 locations over 3 summers. And I really got to have a close up look at the Maritimes and meet a lot of wonderful people, get to go to a lot of wonderful festivals. And it really was a wonderful way to learn so much more about the region. So I would say that was also a very special experience that came from Live at Five.
Wow. Wow. And I mean, think of all the events that you covered. I mean, IWK, Chris's daddy,
Yes.
Chris Daddies to this day. And I mean, oh my goodness. And it's almost like you are retired from doing the 6 o'clock news, but you're
Yeah.
retired from other things. You keep it.
Well, yeah, that's right. In fact, when I decided that I wanted to wrap up the daily broadcast, CTV kindly asked me if I would stay around and do what I'm doing now, which is commentaries 2 or 3 times a month, doing some writing for the website. And they also asked if I would continue to contribute to election broadcasts, which I did back in the fall, and other political events. And of course, to continue doing things like the Christmas Daddies broadcast and the IWK Telethon, because, really, we've got such a long history at CTV and ATV of doing those programs. It was a great honor to be asked to continue doing them. I love those shows very much, and I love those charities very much.
And they're such great charities, Steve. What can I say? Our next question.
They are really great. You're right, Jack. They are great charities, and they have maritime reach. All across the Maritimes, people benefit from both of those organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. How did you feel when you were nominated as Canadian Best Phone In Broadcaster?
I was nominated a couple of times. The first time I was shocked because I was up against all kinds of heavyweights, and I didn't win, by the way. I didn't win either time. I didn't deserve to win. I was up against, Ed Needham, who was a legendary broadcaster in Toronto, and almost so many great Canadian broadcasters. But it was a real honor and a real flattery to be nominated. I got to go to Toronto and attend the awards ceremony. I got to practice a speech I never got to give. So it was fun, but it was really a learning experience. And it was a good lesson in how much I had to learn too, Jack, because when I considered my work was up against legendary broadcasters who, well, they were at the top of the game, and I had enormous respect for them. But it was a real honor and a flattery and a learning experience just to be in that forum, even for a short period of time.
Oh, I can just imagine. What was it like interviewing? Now, maybe people would know this, or maybe they would. You interviewed not one, not two, not three, not four, but five prime ministers.
Yeah, five prime ministers while they were prime minister, and a couple of prime ministers after they were prime minister. So yeah, I'll tell you, it's been a real treat to have firsthand encounters with people who are so historically significant. I think back, I'll use the example of Brian Mulroney, who, of course, presided over the negotiation of the free trade agreement, doing battle with John Turner. I interviewed both of those gentlemen. And I guess it helps shape one's perspective and one's understanding of our history when you can bring personal experiences and personal recollections to bear and sort of lay those over the monumental events in which they were part. So I will say, anytime I had an opportunity to interview a prime minister or a premier, and I spoke with I think about 40 or 50 provincial premiers during my tenure, it was always important to be well prepared because they, of course, are executing very onerous responsibilities on behalf of their country and their provinces, and they're taking time to be interviewed. So the least you can do, and in fact, what you must do, is be prepared as best you can be.
Oh, absolutely. Uh, can you tell me about your excuse me, filling in for, now this guy's a legend. This guy's been broadcasting. Well, he's retired now, but I think he was
Yeah,
Mr.
well, Lloyd Robertson, Lloyd was and is a friend, but he's been a hero my whole life. I remember watching him on the CBC when he anchored the National, and then later when he came over to CTV and joined Harvey Kirk. And I've known Lloyd a long time, and it was an honor, the honor of a lifetime, really, to sit in his chair, which I did on a number of occasions back in the early part of the 21st century. Surreal to be on that set in that desk on that desk, where of course Lloyd held court for so long and became such a venerated figure in broadcasting and in the country. But he made it very easy, and in fact, he took time to sort of mentor me a little bit in that role. And it's now just a wonderful memory and a wonderful experience to talk about. As I say, when one gets to spend any time with a mentor and a hero, it's a pretty wonderful thing. And many of us don't get that opportunity, and I did on numerous occasions with Lloyd.
Absolutely. Well said. Well said. Um, our next question is what motivated you to write your books before the camera and Live at Five, the story behind its success?
Well, I started writing the Live at Five book when I thought I could have it ready for the 15th anniversary of Live at Five, which would have been, what, 1997 or 90, yeah, 97. But I didn't get it done in time, so it came out a couple of years later. I thought that Live at Five was such a monumental thing, such a part of our heritage in the Maritimes, that it deserved to have a story written about it. And I'd had a front row seat for all the years it was on. So I started to write the book, and it took me a long time. It took me about 5 years to finish it. And it was met with a lot of success. People enjoyed the book. So Nimbus, the publisher, came to me a few years later and said, "Why don't you kind of pick up the story more from a personal perspective? Talk about your years on the 6 o'clock newscast," which I did when I wrote Before the Camera, which was more of a personal story. Live at Five was really an ensemble story about the people who created the program, the people who were on the program, and so on. The second book was more a personal story, and then the third book, which is Murphy's Logic, which is still in print, was really a story that I wanted to do at the end of my daily news career to sort of put it all into perspective, and also to offer some opinions about the way the news business has changed and the way the news business has changed me. And that was the purpose of the third book.
Um, how did you feel, Steve, to how did you feel the how did it feel to receive, excuse me, the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Rail Television Digital News Association?
Uh, I was stunned when I found out about that. I have great respect for our industry and the people who run it. And I guess, I don't know, when we're doing our work over a long career, Jack, we don't tend to think of it in terms of a body of work or lifetime achievement. But it was a real honor to receive that award. And but I was quite stunned when I found out about it. I'll be honest with you. It's not the kind of thing one ever expects. So when it comes along, it's a pretty sweet treat, I'll tell you that.
That's absolutely amazing. And I'm sure I mean, when that did happen, I'm going to imagine you were speechless at the time.
I was speechless when I found out, but I had to give a speech. Fortunately, they give you a little time to prepare, and it was a good time to thank people who had enabled my career, and that, as I recall, is what I tried to do.
Wow. What has it been? Excuse me. What has been the most rewarding aspect of your career?
That's a tough question. I've enjoyed every aspect of my work. I enjoy what I'm doing now. I enjoyed the anchoring, the producing, but I really enjoyed the contact with the community, which we were able to accomplish not only through the broadcast, but also through charities. And I've been very privileged to be involved over my career with 40 or 50 charitable organizations. And I still am involved with some of them even now in I call it my rewirement as opposed to my retirement. But I think that's the most satisfying part is being able to make contact with people in the community to try to find a way to reflect the community back to itself on television and also a way to give back to the community through charity and philanthropic work and that kind of thing.
Uh, what has been the most rewarding? Oh, I already asked that question. Hold on. Next question. How
Okay.
did you decide it was time to step down from your role as a?
Well, I always told myself that I just felt that time would come and that I just would know. And it's really as simple as that. I was during and after the pandemic and during and after the Portapic massacre. And I was feeling tired. I'll be honest with you. I still enjoyed the work, but I wasn't enjoying the toll it was taking on my life in terms of the hours. And I also felt that it was maybe time to let someone else step in and do the work because over the years many people had made way for me. But it's a hard one to answer, Jack, because there was no one event, there was no one trigger. It was just a feeling I got, and I remember the morning that I woke up and I said to Heather, I think the time has come, and it had.
Did and the rest is history, as they say. Uh,
History and progress.
exactly. What are some of the biggest challenges you seen in the broadcast industry over the years?
Well, I think the news business is in particularly tough shape at the moment, Jack, because people, of course, are no longer using daily television, daily newspapers, and daily radio for their news the way they used to. It's now migrated to other sites, some of which are very responsible and legitimate, others of which are really trafficking not so much in news, but just information, much of which may or may not be true. And the trouble is that the news organizations have always relied on the advertising model to support the reporting, the journalism. We did at ATV, CTV, we did in private radio, newspapers did, and so on. Chronicle Herald did, Cape Breton Post did. And the trouble is that in moving all of the delivery of the information onto uh, internet-based services, they haven't found a way, the news organizations, to make enough money to continue doing the reporting the way that it needs to be done. And this is a real challenge for the whole, not only the broadcasting industry, but for the news industry. And I do believe that the key to being well is being well informed, and it's becoming more and more difficult for many people to be well informed because so much of what's coming at them is not reliable information. So I think we need to spend some time as a society, certainly as an industry, a profession. We need to spend a lot of time thinking about how we're going to fix that because bad information produces some very, very negative outcomes, and we are seeing some of those now.
Oh, absolutely. You know, I'm from the old school, so my idea of getting the news is watched on TV. I don't go on my phone,
Right,
tablet.
right.
The new school will do that, but that's not me.
But an awful lot of what we used to call television news is still being produced in the same way. It's just being delivered in a different way. It doesn't really matter to me what screen you're getting the information on, so long as the information is reliable and trustworthy. And so long as it's being created by people who are trying to get it right. And I'm not saying that in journalism we always get it right because we're human, we make mistakes. But when we do, we correct them. And if we are not doing our jobs properly, then we deserve to be criticized. But many journalists are still, and journalistic organizations are still doing the job properly, and they're not being respected because people wonder whether they can be trusted and whether they can be believed.
Very true. Can you share a story? Can you share a story about a particular challenging broadcast?
Well, there were many challenging broadcasts over the years. I remember during the Hurricane Juan back in 2003, we were doing the newscast basically on a generator. The newsroom was in darkness. Of course, there was no public transit. We had trouble getting people to work. The electricity wasn't reliable. There weren't, grocery stores open and so on. So people were really up against it, and we were trying to keep people well informed. But of course, when the power goes out, media like television suffer. It took us a little while to get the generator up and running. But I do remember that as being a particularly challenging time because while we were having a tremendous amount of difficulty keeping the television station operating, the demand for the information was very high. Even though many people sadly didn't have any way to receive the information at that time because they were without power too. But we had to continue creating the information for those people who were able to get it. So that was a particularly challenging time, and that went on for several days.
Amazing. Oh, a very, very young lady wanted to say hi to you, and you met her several years ago.
Okay.
Remember Kendall McKenzie?
Kendall McKenzie. Give me some context as to where I met Kendall.
You met her at the station. I think her mother brought her in. Very, very.
Oh, yes, 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 yes. I do remember meeting Kendall McKenzie. She came into the TV station. You're absolutely right.
Anyway, she wanted to give a hi. So tell Steve.
Well, hi right back to Kendall.
And Steve Murphy, I want to thank you so much for taking time today to speak with me. I am super appreciative. All the best to you, and keep up the good work, and best luck in your success.
Well, and same to you, Jack. And listen, congratulations on all the great success you're having with what you're doing. I know you've had a lot of great guests on there. Your guest list is pretty darn impressive. So keep it up.
Take care.
Bye bye.